Now, campaigners for equality between the sexes have called today Equal Pay Day. That's because they claim the gender pay gap means women will effectively work for free from today until the new year. And that's 3 days longer than in 2013. In a moment, I'll talk to the Cabinet Minister in charge of putting that right, Nicky Morgan. First, though, here's Adam Fleming.
Don't you love it when a thorny public policy issue is turned into a musical? Opening in the West End this week, Made in Dagenham tells the story of female workers at the Ford car factory in Essex in the 60s who fought for the first legislation on equal pay.
Nowadays, per hour of work, on average, men earn 19.7% more than women do. That gap's been closing over the last few decades, but in the last few years, it started to widen again slightly. The statisticians say it's too early to tell if that's just a blip.
And the stats are pretty complicated. Men are more likely to work full-time and to work more hours. Part-time workers are more likely to be women, but they tend to be paid more per hour than part-time working men. Some professions are more unequal than others. And how do you compare different jobs in the same industry? That's the issue at Asda, where hundreds of workers are launching discrimination tribunals. They claim that employees in store, mostly women, are paid less than employees in the warehouse, mostly men. Asda say they've won awards for equality and never discriminate, but not everyone sees it that way.
Well, I think everybody who works in Asda, be it shop floor, canteen assistants, tills, I think we all deserve the same rate of pay. We all work hard, every single one of us. I can't see why we should be split up and given a certain rate of pay over somebody else when we do all work hard.
A firm of solicitors has been hosting clinics with employees to explain the foundation of the law on equal pay. Work that's similar in terms of duties or its value to a company deserves the same salary. It comes after Birmingham City Council set aside more than £700 million to compensate female employees, like cooks and care workers, who didn't get the same bonuses as more male-dominated roles like street cleaners and refuse collectors. But back at the theatre, I met Ryan from the right-wing think tank the IEA, who reckons it's all based on a misreading of how the labour market actually works.
Often when we're looking at this question, we're not looking at equal work. It may be that somebody's working in a different location, which is more undesirable or desirable to work at, that they have a different level of performance, or it's more difficult for whatever reason for an employer to attract people to those jobs. So quite often when we talk about equal pay for equal work, we're not actually talking about the same work, and that has to be taken into consideration when we think about these issues.
In other words, it's not just a musical that was made in Dagenham, but one of the trickiest political issues of our time.
I need a T-shirt like that. Education Secretary and the Minister responsible for equalities, Nicky Morgan, is here with me in the studio. Welcome to the Daily Politics.
Morning.
Let's pick up then on the main point of that. Is it up to courts or politicians like yourself to decide whether two different jobs within the same industry should command the same pay?
Well, I actually think it's up to employers, but what government can do is to highlight the inconsistencies and to push for greater transparency, which we've done through Think Act report and other initiatives. And of course, we have seen the overall, over the course of the last 10 years, and particularly under this government, we have seen the gender pay gap narrowing, and we have also seen it particularly narrowing for those under 40. So that leads to some other questions about why is there a pay gap at different stages of working life.
Right, so you say really it should be up to the employers to make that decision?
Well, I think that employers will obviously make a judgment about how much they need to pay each employee in order to do that job, and we heard there about where they work and the type of work that's going on. But the point is that employers should not be paying different rates for the same job to men and women, and also not penalising, particularly often it's women who work part-time and who then find they're being paid less for doing the same
So
task.
the court shouldn't be ruling on this then?
Well, I think the court, it is, obviously we've seen the various cases, we mentioned the report Birmingham, and obviously now got the Asda. I'm not going to comment on ongoing legal cases, but I think what the court cases have done is to highlight these inconsistencies, and then it is for employers, as I say, to respond, but also for government to shed a light through transparency initiatives on what employers are doing.
But they are going to rule on this. Are you going to abide by that decision when they look specifically at the case? You mentioned Birmingham, but this case now by women at Asda, saying that their job at the tills, mostly done by women, should be given the same pay as men who mainly work in the warehouses. If the courts rule that they should do, will you back it?
We would always look at what the courts say, and actually we've got the Equal Pay Act, which says that men and women will always should be paid the same rate for doing the same job. If we need to go further, then we would of course look at that. But actually, I think what the court cases are showing are the inconsistencies, and what government can do is to highlight by making companies more transparent.
I'm still not clear. You said it should be the employers. If the court rules on this, that actually they have been paying them different salaries and they should be the same, will you back that ruling and say to employers they must abide by it?
Well, of course, because
so it is up to the courts then to make that decision and then enforce it?
Well, what we'd like to see is there isn't a need for court action, because frankly employers should be paying the right rates anyway. And I say what government can do is show that's happening, and what the companies that are doing that well and companies that are not doing it properly. And it's sad and disappointing that in this day and age there are still employees having to take court action to make their companies pay them properly.
Right, but you could say, I mean, you're a Conservative politician, a believer in the free market. You have implied that it should be up to employers, but swung round to saying in the end you will abide by the courts. Shouldn't it be up to employers to decide who gets paid what?
Well, I think we're getting into a rather esoteric argument.
Well, except
here.
It's very important, because if these cases, these are landmark rulings, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Equal pay for the same job is one thing, but equal pay for different jobs in the same industry is really something quite different.
Absolutely, it is very different. And at the end of the day, I certainly believe that it is for employers will make the judgment of what they are going to pay employees. But I think what we're talking about, and we're talking about equal pay, it is what people want is equality for doing the same job. And I think what we're particularly seeing, and some of the statistics from today, is where women often are working part-time, they want flex working, where employers will penalise sometimes women in particular for not doing full hours, but they are doing the same job.
Right. Do you think then that working on a till at Asda is the same job, requires the same level of skills as a man, because it is mainly men in this case, working in a distribution warehouse?
Do you know, that really has to be a decision for the employers. They will know in relation to the numbers of people they're able to find for the jobs, the skills that are needed, how long people have worked.
But not the courts, because that's the case that's gone to the courts.
Well, the courts will obviously make a judgment about these things, and that's what they've been asked to rule on. We are some way off at the moment actually getting near to the courts, but obviously we've seen the Birmingham case too. But clearly the courts will make a decision, but then the employers will work out how they're going to implement that. I'm keen from what the government perspective
just to stop you there. If the court does make the decision, they make the decision that actually they should be paid the same. The employers can't look at it; they'll have to pay them the same, won't they?
And that's what Birmingham had to set aside, as we heard in the report, £700 million to do that.
Right, but right. You're still saying the employer should have the choice. They won't have the choice, will they, if the courts rule? Well,
employers overall make decisions about how much they're going to pay their employees. Now, there are some sectors where there are pay bans, and it's very clear whether we're talking about perhaps education or the public services, and there are other companies, private sector companies, who will make a decision, and it is for those employers to make that decision about what they feel employees need to be paid in particular roles.
Was it right for David Cameron to give Tina Stoll the job of the Leader of the House of Lords on lower pay and worse conditions than her predecessor?
Well, we saw at the time of the reshuffle that actually there was a mechanism designed so that Tina would be on the same income. The point is actually
she was going to be paid £22,000 or thereabouts less than her predecessor.
Well, and I think that the party was going to step in from memory on that.
But that's quite different to being offered the same pay. I mean, was that wrong? I mean, what message did that send out when he said to Tina Stoll, "This is the job I'd like you to do, but you're not going to sit at the cabinet table like your predecessor, and you're not going to be paid as much"?
Well, she does sit at the cabinet table. We have resolved the issue
since then, so it was wrong, wasn't it? He made a mistake. That was a classic case of not paying her the same as her male predecessor.
Well, I think it was highlighted and it was dealt with.
Right. What was your view at the time when it was first offered?
Well, I know Tina. I know that she's incredibly capable and competent, and I know that she's doing the job absolutely brilliantly. And I think you're right. There is obviously clearly a wider issue about making sure that everybody is paid the right amount based on the skills and the job that they are doing,
or an equal amount in this case. Do you think there are cultural stereotypes still at the top of industries like government, for example, where women are paid less?
Well, I think what we are seeing today in the figures that have been published, there are three main reasons why women get paid less. Often they're in professions which are lower paid, they get less far up the career ladder, and there are some clear cases which will potentially result in legal action where men and women are being paid different amounts for doing either the same or very similar jobs. The latter is clearly unacceptable, and the other two require longer-term cultural change, which I'm trying to do as Education Secretary, which is about raising the aspirations of our girls and our young people generally, because the research will show that if girls are doing particularly subjects like maths and science for longer, their earnings potential is much higher. And we need to have that conversation early in education as to the subject choices and then the career choices our young people are making.
There's already a law to force large companies to publish pay rates. Why hasn't your government enforced that law?
Because it only applies to companies with over 250 employees, and the vast majority of people in this country who work in the private sector work in smaller companies. And we also believe in
why
more of
haven't
a
you enforced the
voluntary
law for those companies?
We also believe in more of a voluntary approach. And what we have seen about things like women on boards, where Lord Davies has done some absolutely sterling work, is that actually you are much more likely to drive longer-term cultural change if you don't mandate something, but actually work with. So in the case of women on boards, what we've seen
percentage of women on boards now?
It's now 22.8%. We're heading for 25%.
Right.
Yes, look, of course.
It's not equal, is it?
It's, well,
I mean,
of
what I'm
course,
saying
I would
is
like
that
to see
the voluntary
women.
approach arguably hasn't worked.
I think it has worked because we have seen in this Parliament we've gone from 12% of women on boards to 22%, but yes, we have further to go, and we could talk about women in broadcasting, we could talk about women in politics, we could talk about women who are CEOs of listed companies. Yes, there is, of course, further to go.
Right. I mean, of course, Labour will always say, well, it worked for us because we actually had women-only shortlists. And not just to use that example because it's used repeatedly, but to come back to this voluntary element, why not force those larger companies to publish their pay rates? What have they got to hide?
Well, because actually we've got the Think Act report where we've got over 250 companies who have signed up who are looking at gender equality right the way across their companies. And today we are talking about having some software so that companies are able to link up HR, what the numbers of employees and the employees they have with the pay rate so they can actually see what the gap is. A lot of the time, actually, companies and their employees don't know. We want to make it much more transparent.
But that's the
so
point.
That people then know.
Right. And the only way you'd be able to find out and actually take a company to court or a tribunal is if you could see those pay rates.
Absolutely.
How many companies of the size you were talking about actually do publish their pay rates?
It's a very, I think it's it is a small number at the moment, and actually part of today's technical. Can I just go back to your point there about Women's Shortlist? Because actually what it hasn't done in the Labour Party is driven the culture, because you still see local parties who get very upset when they have Women's Shortlists. What I want to see as a politician and as a former working woman in a professional services firm is cultural change, so that people aren't thinking, they're thinking actually diversity is great, we need more women doing these jobs, and we need to be more flexible in how we employ women, particularly when they are juggling caring responsibilities.
And the percentage of female MPs in the Tory party?
Well, it's not high enough, and actually we need to have more. But we have, under David Cameron's leadership, we have many more women. We have gone from 17 to 48 female members of Parliament, and we have over a third of our candidates selected next election are now women.
Right. And how many are stepping down after just serving a term?
Well, and there are men who are doing that too, and actually they've all got, as you know, Joe, their own individual reasons for doing that.
Sure.
I don't think we should query that.
All right. No, I'm just looking at the numbers in terms of how many more female MPs you're going to get.
We bring it back to the issue of equal pay. I mean, there's a lot of what Nicky Morgan said I completely agree with. There's a further point which was alluded to in brief, and obviously this is a much bigger conversation than a few sentences. But it is also about assertiveness. It's actually about the employee as much as the employer. Now, when you have bands, there are obviously different bands, particularly in, to use the old term, white-collar jobs. You usually find that women are at the lower end of the same band. And you blame the employee rather than the employer? No. I blame a whole cultural issue. But it is employers always, if a woman goes to a boss, I'm being stereotypical and generalising hideously now, and says, you know, I would like a pay rise, I believe I've proven my worth in their annual performance review or whatever it is, the instinctive tendency is always, oh, she's bossy, oh, she's this, oh, she's that. And time and again, and the boss can sometimes be a woman as much as a man, women just don't get the extra that they deserve, even though they're doing absolutely the same work. I think that's slightly different from this apples and oranges question about from Asda.
Do you think the court should have the responsibility to make that ruling?
Well, I think absolutely. Where there is a systemic culture in which doing the same or similar work, and one is being underpaid for that, and promotions that are denied and all that sort of thing, absolutely. I think where people are doing two completely different jobs in a same organisation, that's a much more moot point about delivering value. You know, if one person is doing one completely different thing to another, should you automatically give the same salary, the same pay, even if they're inhabited by different genders? I think that's a different thing. But I think where the job is similar, time and time again, you find that women are at the lower levels of the pay band than men, and it's a massive cultural question. Absolutely, there should be an onus on employers to do that, and we've made very, very little progress on this.
Right, and it comes back to the point that if you compelled companies to publish their rates, if they were shamed into showing that they were giving different pay to men and women doing the same or similar jobs, wouldn't that create an atmosphere for more equal pay?
Well, I suppose it would do is get the numbers out there, but what it wouldn't do is drive the cultural change about why companies need to have a more diverse workforce. We haven't said Section 78 of the Equality Act is there. The government could certainly bring it into force, but as I say, we're going to pursue this voluntary approach of getting information out there, having proper transparency, enabling employees to have those conversations with their bosses, and let's see where we get to at that point. It has worked for women on boards. We have made progress. Let's see where we get to when there is more transparency. And as I say, this particular software that we are launching, so you can compare pay rates and have more transparency in companies.
All right,
I'd love to see, by the way, BBC pay rates.
Right. Well,
top talent, managers and lower ends of staff. I'd love to see if they are equivalent.
I invite you to write to the people in charge of the BBC. Thank you very much, Nicky Morgan.
Thank you.
Equal pay campaigners say that the gender pay gap has widened for the first time in 5 years. The government says it's committed to reducing the income gap and that more women are employed in the UK than ever before. Rebecca Williams reports.
Equal pay for equal work. It's been the law for decades. But some women are still paid less than their male counterparts. It used to be like that for Liz Schaefer, until she won a tribunal against her employer.
I just couldn't believe it, and I felt I was being taken for a ride. I was doing exactly the same job. I was publishing, I was teaching, I was doing my administration, and I was being paid a lot less.
New figures show in 2013 the gender pay gap widened for the first time in 5 years. Research by the TUC says for every pound earned by a man in the UK, a woman gets on average 80 pence. That, it says, equates to an extra £5,200 per year for a working man. It's claimed the UK is now behind both Nicaragua and Bulgaria in giving women an equal chance of a good education and career. The TUC is calling on employers to carry out regular gender pay audits.
There's a huge incidence of discrimination after women have children around pregnancy and maternity leave. There's a huge lack of transparency as well in pay, so women often don't know that they are being paid less than a male colleague.
And it's that lack of transparency, along with an increasing number of women in low-paid jobs, that experts believe has led to a greater divide in pay. The Department for Education has responded, saying there are now more women working in the UK than ever before. They insist they're committed to reducing the gender pay gap by making it easier for women to juggle both work and family life. Rebecca Williams, BBC News.
Now, campaigners for equality between the sexes have called today Equal Pay Day. That's because they claim the gender pay gap means women will effectively work for free from today until the new year.